What is going on? It's Alex coming back at you with another video, and today it is going to be the beginning of our 3-round mock draft with trades. And just like the NFL draft, I split it up into 2 days, round 1 on day 1, rounds 2 and 3 on day 2. So stay tuned for that. Super excited. We're going to be flying to Mobile, and we're also going to be seeing the Shrine here in Dallas. So we're going to be experiencing both the All-Star Bowls. Super excited for that. And the channel has been growing at the best rate by far that it has ever grown. So thank you so much for your faith in me. I know my board below my face is not necessarily going to be remotely close to anybody else's, but I owe you transparency. These are from my all 22 grades that I end up posting on my positional rankings offensive tackle video. It's already being recorded, so you guys will have that as a nice treat when I'm over at the Shrine Bowl on Saturday. But if you guys do want to see why I kind of think this way, first off, I'll probably explain it, but if you actually want to see all 22 clips, I post that over on my X, so feel free to go to that link tree and be able to go there. Also, if you guys want to have a little extra skin in the game, Super Bowl is going to be coming up. We had an awesome time during my most recent stream during the Natty. Go use the code HAILMARY when you go sign up for UnderDog. Get up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you sign up. And it's just a great site. They're a great company. They support me, and they've just been really nice to you guys, and it's been very fun overall. Let's get into this. Let's have a great time. And yeah, this is going to be a fun episode because the Titans assistant GM of the Kansas City Chiefs becomes your GM and says, if we have a generational player at number 1, we are taking him. Now, while I ended up regrading Travis Hunter in terms of my dream role, he ended up being a blue chip player. And my dream role for him, let's not even get into it because people are going to get pissy. But the bottom line is people believe that Travis Hunter is the guy in the class that is called generational. I'm not fully sold on that. I do think that he's a very, very, very good player. I do think he's overrated because people think he's generational. But I also think that he is phenomenal. It's just it's an interesting balance, I should say. But Travis Hunter, I do think we're gonna have to throw a curveball in here because when the GM says something like that, yeah, he ended up describing also Cam Ward when he ended up describing the quarterback that he'd be looking for. But I do think that there is gonna be nobody trying to offer for this trade for this pickup here. I mean, the cost to move up to 1 is so expensive. I agree. I mean, look, we are kind of a little vacant from 35 to 101. But I think that's going to be an issue we need to solve at 35. So we're going to be moving forward with Travis Hunter here to test out a new theory that is based off of one of the most recent comments from your new GM, which is you guys are going to go after the best player available, and a lot of people think that is Travis Hunter. I'm not going to blame you if you think Travis Hunter is the guy. I think he'd work really well as a weapon in this offense, and I think that's actually the role he would end up playing. Is you could use him as a potential corner, but I think he'd actually be a weapon in Brian Callahan's offense, which is awesome. Like, it's weird because, again, I don't see a perfect vision for it, but his comments are something that I can't ignore, right? He's going to have a lot of control, and unfortunately, as much as I want to say, hey, I think that there is a lot better routes to go for the value, I still think that, they're going to go after the player they think is best. They're not going to let Snead stop them if they think he's going to be your corner of the future. But I also think he works really well with Brian Callahan in the offense where, you could play that Tyler Boyd role going forward. And number 2 for the Cleveland Browns, you might say, hey, this is a slam dunk for Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders. I honestly am starting to think that the Browns are going to continue putting veteran quarterbacks in place until they actually feel comfortable going forward. They're a type that I do believe will go after the best player available. They have not really done well in terms of the quarterback carousel, especially at the top of the draft. So I don't think I want to roll the dice on it again. I think going after the best player available, again, in the eyes of the consensus, and based on what the Cleveland Browns have, I think Abdul Carter is the best player available. He may be 10 on my board, but let me explain why before you get a little grouchy. I think Abdul Carter, I do have an 83-minute edge video out on this. I think Abdul Carter is a very underwhelming run defender. Not a bad run defender, but extremely underwhelming for the amount of hype that he gets. I think that he is worth the number 2 pick if you are looking at somebody primarily for their pass rushing and athletic upside. And he has that. And he's great as a pass rusher. He's the best pass rusher in the class. And when you have Isaiah McGuire on your squad, I think he complements Abdul Carter so well that you don't have to sacrifice in order to be able to, you don't have to roll the dice with Abdul Carter's run defense ability because you do have that solid foundation there behind Abdul with Isaiah McGuire. And so we're going to go with this. I mean, you could try to say, hey, are the Raiders calling up? You just have to look at how expensive the pick is, right? And I'm personally not the biggest believer in the quarterback class. Not many people are. I mean, Trevor Sikkema, no one wants to talk about it. Everyone's like, oh, well, you hate on the quarterback class. I mean, I have Shedeur Sanders higher than Trevor Sikkema. Like, I mean, it's Trevor Sikkema is someone who I have a ton of respect for, who I'll literally be seeing in 2 days. Like, it's somebody who I really do respect his opinion. And he doesn't have that fond of an opinion of the quarterback class, even more so than me. So if you don't have a very strong sense that these quarterbacks are going to be franchise quarterbacks, do not take them here unless you are desperate. Which Stefanski, with the new offensive coordinator, he has experience. Reese has experience with Milroe. Why not wait to pick 67 to take a shot on Jalen Milroe and see what happens, or maybe end of the second and move up for him? I think that's a far better strategy than rolling the dice again with somebody else. I get a veteran for another year, let him train up Jalen Milroe, and then say bye-bye to Deshaun Watson as soon as it becomes viable. I'm going to go Abdul Carter here at number 2, and let the Giants here at number 3 make the self-preservation move. I was talking about this with the Giants before, as while I was taking Shedeur Sanders to them. And again, this is a mock draft with trades. We could have tried to trade out and do some fun stuff there, but I think with the New York Giants specifically, like Joe Shea and Brian Daboll are both on very short leashes. They're going to make a move that brings them the most potential for a job rehire, or at least a job extension, maybe a year or 2. That's going to be what a quarterback does. Say, hey, I'm working with this. And I think, honestly, the dream for them is if Cam Ward slips here. Because the argument will be, hey, Brian did this with Josh Allen. He's never had a quarterback in this building with this much arm talent. So we should go after someone like Cam Ward, because you give us a couple years. We're doing a good job in the draft. We have our quarterback. That's going to be a legitimate pitch where if I'm Mara, I'm like, yeah, I mean, it has some like legit foundation to it. I think the logic is there. So I think it works for both the organization, because it is true. Brian Daboll did work with Josh Allen and made him noticeably better. And so I think that there is a very positive trend for what happens if Cam Ward slips to number 3. And I think it's a better trend than if he goes at number 1, because I don't trust Brian Callahan with him. Just going to say it. I don't. I trust Brian Callahan with Shedeur Sanders, not with Cam Ward. But at number 4 for the New England Patriots, you could try to say, hey, do we want to move up for Shedeur Sanders if you're the Raiders, right? Like, that is certainly something you could consider. The Jets might say, yo, Shedeur is able to be handling the big lights. Like, is that a team, or is this a guy who, with Aaron Glenn, do we want somebody similar in terms of floor to what has been super successful there in Detroit? Like, Jared Goff is not necessarily the ceiling quarterback. He's just a damn good quarterback, and that is what Shedeur Sanders could be if the Jets did want to do that. But I don't think the Jets are the team I would be sending towards pick number 4. I mean, if I'm New England, I might just be like, if I don't believe in Shedeur, I could be like, shoot, I can be able to rob the Jets and get them to take a quarterback that I don't believe in. That'd be some sinister business right there. That would be kind of nuts. Like, I would find that very entertaining. But I just don't think anybody's worth moving up for at this point. I think we are so trained now to believe that Shedeur Sanders is a lock in the top 3 that it's insane that he falls to 4. But at the same time, we have to continue reframing our thought process. Is Shedeur Sanders better than Bo Nix? The answer is no. Then, I mean, I know we were lower on Bo Nix, but Bo Nix went high at 12. Was he better than Michael Penix coming out? I don't think so. Well, actually, I could say it's relatively debatable, and that is pretty debatable, I will admit. But like, I think he is near that McCarthy Penix territory, where Penix had his questions with age and injury. McCarthy had his questions in terms of, in the big games, he didn't really produce much, right? He was just more so clutch. And then like, you got Bo Nix, who I was much higher on. And then I think that Shedeur Sanders would be sitting right there, probably behind that group, which would have been, even in a pretty loaded class, not considered top 5. So we can't allow ourselves to believe that because we take Shedeur Sanders high all the time, that he deserves to be a player that someone spends a potential 2nd round pick moving up for. That's a little insane. So I don't think the Patriots will get a good enough offer here. I think that, it's certainly, there's not enough teams that would be vying for this pick. There's not enough players to entice an offer, in my opinion. So with that being said, I think the New England Patriots have to do the most out of what they can while they sit and pick here. And getting Drake May a weapon like Tetro McMillan is never a bad idea. Giving your quarterback someone who's reliable is never a bad idea. The dream would be to move back, but I just don't see the buyer. Like, unless you're talking about the Raiders, which again, unless the Jets are offering, who the hell else is offering to move up? Like, you also got to realize that. It's like, okay, well, there's the player and there's the team. So there's a player, there's a motive. But where's the competition? What's the drive for the Raiders to move up? I don't think it's there. So I think I'm going to go Tetro McMillan for the Patriots, giving them a very reliable weapon. Assuming T. Higgins does not go there. Because obviously if he does, which I had that being the assumption for a while, I just don't know if that's going to be the case anymore. Josh McDaniels, if I'm not mistaken, has not been notoriously great with possession style receivers. Again, feel free to correct me, but from my memory at the moment, I don't really have a prolific X-build receiver that I particularly think replicates what Tetro McMillan will do, T. Higgins would do. So I think that it would be a little bit more in T. Higgins' interest to maybe not go there and maybe allow Josh McDaniels to build that skill set with Tetro McMillan, even though Josh is a fantastic OC. I like the hire, by the way, just so it's clear. At number 5 for the Jacksonville Jaguars, I mean, again, we could talk about potential move-ups here. You got Mason Graham, who probably could go to Jaguars because Trent Baalke is fired, baby. By the way, if you guys are wondering, I should have said this at the start of the video. This is a Justin Jefferson LSU jersey. Like, you guys know how much I love college football jerseys. But, Baalke's fired, man. God is good. we all prayed for this moment. And I think that will take the necessity out of the equation for Mason Graham's arm length and like measurables. And I really love you guys for saying this because someone called it out and said, hey, man, like, I'm looking at your defensive interior rankings. Mason Graham's too low. And I'm like, I mean, hey, these are my all 22 grades. But when you think about it, I don't, like, all these positions could be graded on a different scale. It might be easier to score high as a corner or as a running back than it is for a defensive interior. And I'm not saying that's the case. While technically I do lower my running backs by a very noticeable amount. I do end up realizing, well, I should be boosting my defensive interiors more. And so I did. I ended up retooling my board, ended up boosting Tyleek back to the spot where I really think I like him at that 20 mark. And, it really was just a shift of the positional value. I didn't have to change their grades, which made me so happy because I really ended up boosting. I dropped Omar an extra spot because I didn't put in there the lack of reps enough into an ain't factor. So it didn't change the grades. In case you guys want to watch the defensive interior video, it's the exact same. It's just the overall grade shifted. And so regardless of all of that, I do think defensive interior needed to be valued more. So thank you guys again you can be a dick, just don't be a dick about it, right? Tell me where you think that I could end up improving. And if I end up doing that, then it makes better content for you and for me. I think Mason Graham's a super high floor bet. I think a boundary corner is a smart thing to do, but I don't think a new GM and a new coach are going to come in and say, hey, we're going to hitch our wagon to a cornerback that, although is amazing, had a pretty banged up season. And, I think that this is a solid corner class. They might feel comfortable sniping that down the board, even though defensive interior is a similar position in that regard. But Mason Graham's been far healthier than Will Johnson, so for a new organization, they might feel a little bit more reserved. At number 6 for the Las Vegas Raiders, a spot where you could try to bounce from, but again, you're just sitting at this spot, and you could end up debating whether Pete Carroll's going to be the coach, or, you could try to make a hard push for Robert Saleh, which, by the way, I think he's right now the head guy for the Jaguars. Mason Graham makes too much sense for that, too. Kind of would be their Quinn Williams of the equation, but I think if the Raiders are sitting here at 6, you got to factor a couple of things. Jacorian Bennett, if I'm not mistaken, has been unreliably healthy. The best ability is availability. I do think that running back could be the piece on the Raiders that puts everything together. But at the same time, if Shedeur falls to you, you have to take him, right? I mean, this is a team that definitely needs a foundation. And Aiden O'Connell was fun, right? I liked Aiden O'Connell. I liked him as a backup. He was like a number 100 player, someone who I would say is like a fringe starter, backup type of dude. And that's exactly what he is. He can come in short term and end up, not crashing the ship as hard as what maybe a bum would do. But Shedeur is somebody who's going to be that almost the exact opposite, a very high floor player that can distribute the ball. I think it's fair to say we go after Shedeur Sanders at this point. But I do think that if the NFL teams are lower on Shedeur, Will Johnson would make a lot of sense. But being able to have that consistency, I get it. Shedeur Sanders is the right move. And number 7 for the Jets, again, we're not going to have trades up in here. Like we do, this is a trades mock, but like the value just falling perfectly. DJ Reed could be bouncing, even though he was super hyped up about Aaron Glenn thing. Like he ended up tweeting out about loving Aaron Glenn. So I do think that Will Johnson could be not viewed as the best option, which then I'd honestly trade out of here. Like maybe you do a 1-spot trade down with the Panthers. Maybe you do a 2-spot move up with the Saints. Or like hell, I mean, if the Niners are just going to say, fuck it, balls to the wall, they could go after Will Johnson. I mean, best player available is never a bad thing. But I do think cornerback is always a position you can continue improving upon. I don't think DJ Reed's going to be there. And feel free, again, be a dick, just don't be a dick about it. If you think otherwise, by all means, say why. And you know what? You might enlighten me. But I think Will Johnson's going to be the pick there at pick 7. At pick number 8 for the Carolina Panthers, I might try to move out of this spot. I mean, I'm looking at the Saints as one of the primary teams to be able to go after the offensive side of the ball. On the offensive line, particularly. So if that's the case, are there any teams that are looking at offensive line? Technically, the next 3. But I don't think the Bears need to feel desperate. There's a lot of really good offensive line pieces. And worst case scenario, you get Ashton Genty. I'd prefer to keep my picks. If I'm Ben Johnson, I'm sitting there, I'm like, well, Poles Johnson, let's not fuck around here, right? Let's not move up for Josh Simmons when we could end up landing, Josh Connerly. But at the same time, I do think that there is a little bit of an inflation of value here or I would say maybe a lack of teams that see the need in moving up. That's the problem. You could have like micro move ups and stuff. Like my dream pick for them, low key, would be Malachi Starks because at 58, I trust the edge talent. But at the same time, I also think that you can go with Xavier Watts, Nick Eamon-Wari, or, I mean, if you really have to reach down the bag at 74, of all things, God forbid, there are plenty of safeties that I feel comfortable with. You can go with Kevin Winston. You can go with Lathan Ransom. I think that's perfectly reasonable. And free agency, you can get safeties for a relatively reasonable price. If we're going to talk about how tight ends shouldn't go in the top 10 because of how much you save, safety is a very similar position. You're not going to be paying him $25 million a year. Edge rusher, you might be paying him $35 million a year if they are really that good. And I'm fully sold on James Pierce. I mean, Michael Williams is awesome, but James Pierce versus Ohio State started worrying me a little bit. I was watching, Josh Simmons there because I'm like, hey, I want to see Josh Simmons versus James Pierce. James Pierce didn't look as explosive as what I thought. And the more I watched James Pierce, the more I realized he was dealing with an injury that was never disclosed. This guy, you look at how he was playing like a game or two before that, unbelievably twitched up. This dude was definitely dealing with something, and that just shows, that's a testament to how strong he is as a player. I love seeing players that he was still effective, but just didn't necessarily have the same 100% that he did, and he still did well too. I mean, James Pierce Jr. is such a fantastic player. I'm going to go with him. I think it's a smart thing to do, and I ended up posting this on my X, so you can feel free to go check it out. And I did it today because I was studying Tyler Booker. But Tyler Booker was walling off the hole for a run lane. James Pierce bent his ass backwards. It was incredible. And like he started making Booker slide. It wasn't like a crazy play or anything where it was like, oh my God, he just like sat Booker on his ass. No. But the fact is, a 243 skinny, poor run defender. I mean, when people say he's a poor run defender, it just shows they haven't watched him play. I mean, this dude really has an amazing run anchor, especially for his size. Almost someone who's 100 pounds heavier, who is notorious for absolutely bullying players smaller than him. James Pierce was the one to hold his ground and, in fact, close the hole from his side as well. The other defensive interior ended up actually making the play, but James Pierce limited that play and ended up making the play so much easier for the defensive interior. I think he's a fantastic guy. Secured my love for him at number 2 on my board. At number 9 for the New Orleans Saints, a couple routes you can go. You can go the wide receiver route. It's okay. I'm not going to disagree. But I will say, move back if you're going to do that. I don't think Luther Burden is as special as what people want to say. Of course, I'm still reevaluating wide receiver position right now just to be able to, keep my grades as up to date as possible. And I've dived too deep into some of the other classes for right now. But I mean, every time I watch Luther Burden, I get the same exact feeling. This guy's really, really solid after the catch. He does not run routes well. He's not an elite athlete. He's really good after the catch. It sounds a lot like Malachi Corley. Not saying that's where he should be drafted. I think he's a better version of. But like my instant comp for him was Deontay Johnson with a Terrace Marshall mentality, because Luther Burden jogs on a lot of reps. But this is not to shit on him. This is not a place where I would even take him to begin with. I think there's a couple positions you need to look at. First off, you could go Malachi Starks, best player available in terms of like flexibility, skill set, if you're trying to do the New Orleans Saints thing, which is get players at the right position just a year or so before you kind of need to. But I really think the biggest thing is that right tackle spot. That right tackle spot needs some help. And you could potentially get it at 40. There's someone who I absolutely adore at pure right tackle. That's Ozzie Trapilo. But Josh Simmons is the guy who I've been kind of sitting on and thinking that's the best move. It's the best move for the team. Because worst case scenario, you kick him into guard, he's great. And my grade for him was an 82.25, a blue chip grade before he got hurt. So all those grades are pre-injury, the ones with the plus. So I'm not going to bullshit and say, hey, this is how good the player is after they're injured. That just doesn't make very much sense. It just adds a level of skepticism to me that I end up not taking him where I have him on my board. So I do think that you could go that route. I also know that edge certainly is a very realistic move. Like Michael Williams kind of fits the MO of what the Saints do. But I think it's a time for a new era. And you guys ended up liking someone who is mobile, really solid run blocker, and just someone who has some good power to his game. To me, Josh Simmons doesn't not fit that, right? He's 6'5", 310. He's mobile. He's young enough, 22. I'll take that all day. But, I mean, this game, I still thought he did well in Oregon versus before he ended up hurting himself. I'm personally going to be perfectly fine going Josh Simmons. Number 10 for the Chicago Bears. I have a large vision for the Bears, and you guys know, if you guys watched my last mock draft, what I actually believe the Bears should do. I think Ashton Jeanty is a very realistic target. However, I would honestly look in the realm of potentially defensive line here. And it's not for the reason that you necessarily think, but I like the interior offensive line class. I mean, I'm looking at Josh Connerly as like my one exception. I love Josh Connerly, and this will reflect very similarly to how my last mock draft went. But Josh Connerly's, I think I'll go with that pick. But if we were to pass on interior offensive line with the upside of being tackle, right? Whether that's Will Campbell, Kelvin Banks, Josh Connerly, Wyatt Milam, like you name it. Guys who could potentially play guard in the short run, tackle in the long. I do think those options might be expelled by 39 to the point where it's like Ben Johnson had a really good offensive line. And that was a big reason, including the running backs. But if you're able to trade back from 41, end up landing, either it's Caleb Johnson, but I think the best option would be Quinshon Judkins. And maybe while that you do that trade back, you can use the pick you got from that to trade up from 72 to get Trey Henderson. You instantly have a Sonic and Knuckles pair there. And I know DeAndre Swift gets the short end of the stick, but that's kind of what he does at this point. But you can end up building that for the long run at 39, get a defensive lineman. So I'm going to go Josh Connerly here. I think that's the best choice. Defensive line is certainly intriguing, but again, it's a deep defensive line class. Offensive line, I don't really like to fuck around with. I don't like to roll the dice on them. So Josh Connerly going to be the choice there. For the 49ers at pick number 11, it's a interesting spot to be in. I think a dark horse pick here is Tyler Warren. Like, I think he is going to be that perfect George Kittle replacement. And I do want to throw some curveballs in here. Not for the sake of being a curveball thrower. Like, I want it to be realistic, of course. not going to just say, oh, okay, I'm just going to take this because, I've never done it before. No, I want it to at least make sense. George Kittle's going to have 1 year left on his deal. I don't think the Niners are going to be in a spot. You look at the fact they drafted Renardo Green a full year before they ended up having to decide whether they wanted to extend both of their top corners. So you look at that, and they're very good at risk mitigation. And I know my 49ers fans have brought this theory up to me, which is why I'm considering it now. Tyler Warren's no Brock Bowers. Let's first off get that very, very clear. He is no Brock Bowers. But he is also very freaking good. He's a great blocker. He's great after the catch. He's someone who's always open. And Brock Bowers is the best tight end that's probably ever come out. And the Raiders will probably have him for the next 15 to 20 years. So Shedeur Sanders is going to enjoy it. But I think that the best thing you can do is to build on your strong suits before you have to call them a weakness. And Tyler Warren makes a lot of sense here. Like, George Kittle's been a big part of that offense. They have yet to fill it properly. And like, Cam Latu ain't going to do anything anytime soon, right? Like, that 3rd round pick didn't come to fruition. And an area where I trust the Niners to be able to draft, I guess I can't really say edge. I like Drake Jackson, though. I mean, I don't think it's bad. But like, the defensive line makes a lot of sense here. But I do think it's a very realistic possibility that we see Tyler Warren go at number 11, because the NFL is also one that is used to trends. We're seeing that, Brock Bowers can make a massive impact on an offense. I think that, we're guaranteeing he's going in the next 3 picks. So it's not necessarily absurd to say, hey, like, I don't really necessarily fully trust the role of another tight end going forward, outside of Tyler Warren, who is going to be that great blocker, great receiving weapon, sits in the soft spot, he's a punisher after the catch. And it's certainly a curveball, but at the same time, I do think it's worth it. At number 12 for the Dallas Cowboys, this might be a good spot to try to trade back, because at this point, Ashton Jeanty not necessarily going to be at risk of going to the next picks. Again, you kind of sometimes have to go after the best player available, and Ashton Jeanty absolutely could be considered the best player available. But looking at the players who are available, that might be, exciting for teams to come up and grab. You talk about the tackles at the top: Will Campbell, Kelvin Banks. I personally like Josh Simmons, Josh Connolly noticeably more. I blend my board with realism, because I think tackle is the right move for these teams, but I think it's also realistic that they consider Simmons and Connolly respectively. But for the Cowboys, I really do think the position I'm honed in on is Ashton Jeanty. I know that wide receiver could be the move. I also think that if you're sitting there at pick 76 and you end up seeing Isaiah Bond there, it's like, well, we're going to buy a player low who is a legit first-round talent, who's going to be running in the 4.2s, 4.3s, and someone who can run routes very well. He's a very good player, just was banged up this year. So I do think that's very realistic that you guys could end up still getting your receiving weapon there and being perfectly happy. But who is there to move up for? Again, the offensive line, but who's at threat over the next couple of picks? Malachi Starks. And I think because of the fact that Tyler Warren just ended up being yoinked, I do think that we could see that the Colts are in a weird, sticky situation where I don't trust Colston Loveland at 14. I like Colston Loveland. I mean, Colston Loveland, where's he at on my board? And again, if you see a star, that's because they're destined to move down. It's just based on the current grade they have. He's number 33 on my board. I don't like taking that at 14, personally. Not a big fan of that. And so I'd rather go after someone who I have at 17, who I have as a legitimate defensive piece there for the Colts. And again, I'm going to be having Ben Morrison returning in this. Otherwise, I'd probably wait on it. I know that'd be my move for the Dolphins. So I'm having the Cowboys and Colts do a quick little switcheroonie. Pick 120 was 15 to 17. I think pick 115 is going to be perfectly adequate. You could toss in like a future 7th to be able to bridge the gap a little bit. But for the Cowboys who don't even have a 4th round pick, this is how you are able to retool. So the Colts move up, select Malachi Starks. Getting a flexible defensive back piece is always going to be super key. He's not going to be the long-term Kenny Moore replacement unless you want him to be. He's just going to be someone that pairs up there in that secondary, kind of playing that Blackman role, in my opinion, for the long haul. At 13 for the Miami Dolphins, I wish we need to see Greer get fired at this point, right? I mean, like Ballard, speaking of the Colts, Greer, we already had Balky, so it's like, we might as well just, go after the top 3. But because we need to get offensive line. But I just don't think that you guys are necessarily going to do it. So unfortunately, that's just not the case. We could try to trade back here. Again, we have like a team right now in the Dallas Cowboys who, I mean, if there is a team looking for Ashton Jeanty, could see the Broncos get aggressive. Don't think it's going to happen. So I think the interesting pick here would be Jalen Walker. Jalen Walker is a fantastic player who has a multitude of roles. I think he's both a starter at both linebacker and edge. And that's very rare to have. Like, if you siloed him as a pure linebacker, I think he's worth this pick. I think if you siloed him as an edge, I think he is still relatively worth this pick. I mean, if I siloed him as an edge, he would be my number 30 player on my board. So I think that you are in a good spot right now to take the flexibility. Broshmo recommended this as well. I'm going to trust him as a Dolphins fan, and so we're going to be going Jalen Walker there. At 14 for the Cowboys, we got our 4th round pick, and we're getting Ashton Jeanty. I think that now everybody's going to be happy. I do think there is a high possibility he still goes in the top 10 because running backs of that caliber usually go in that range. It's just very tough to think based on how the board is and the teams that are sitting at certain spots. You talk about the Raiders, you talk about the Bears, technically the Niners if you think CMC's not reliable enough, but outside of that, you're just like, I mean, do the Colts feel like, well, you kind of need like a 1-2 punch there with JT? Like, it seems like a little bit of an overwhelming valuation of the running back position. So it is possible. It's just tough to see that, like, hey, if you ended up telling me that that's how it ended up going, Ashton Jeanty falling to the mid-first, I mean, even with the fact that I factor in his 8 fumbles, I do still have my concerns with it. He is still a top 10 player. And again, also factoring in the fact that he's a running back. But Falcons at 15, we need to trade out of this spot. Like, that's the bottom line. You don't have Jalen Walker. You don't have James Pierce. You do have Michael Williams, but we also don't have a lot of picks. I mean, look at that. That is just pathetic. I mean, we both agree that is pathetic. 4 picks. And I mean, to be fair, I don't trust your GM to do jack shit. I mean, so far, not a huge fan of your organization. And I don't think you guys are either. I feel bad for Falcons fans. And I love the Falcons. My first jersey was a Michael Vick jersey. Now, Michael Vick Falcons jersey was pretty sick back in the day. But that was before some other extracurricular activity of his came out. But regardless, for the Falcons, I think edge, obviously the position to address. Corner as well. Ben Morrison, we have returning in this. Otherwise, that would be my pick at 15, even with all this going on. But we're supposed to find out today or tomorrow whether he comes out. If he ends up declaring, like, we won't redo the video, but it will just be updated post Senior Bowl. And I think that's perfectly fair. We'll be happy with that. But for the Atlanta Falcons, I'm going to try to trade back here. Like, we got really good receivers, but we also have good offensive line. I do think that technically would be a threat at number 16. I don't trust the Bengals to move up. I think the Seahawks are looking for a defensive piece. And with that being said, I also think that the Seahawks could feel threatened by the Cardinals getting Michael Williams. I think this is great for both teams too, because we're not giving a 2nd round pick. Remember, like, pick 120 was requisite to move up for the Steelers and the Patriots. This is perfect because 136, you still need to toss in something else, right? Whether it's going to be 185 or 194, you can choose. Like, whoop-de-doo. It's not going to affect the mock draft, in my opinion, a noticeable amount. And so, again, you can feel free to make it. I feel more comfortable doing 194. I would still do it if the Falcons like, we need 185. I'm the Seahawks. I'm like, okay. But I'm going to just say the Falcons might just be happy with the quantity. But you guys also got some good quality there. We're going to go Michael Williams here for the Seattle Seahawks. I think the potential is too damn good. McDonald's going to love it. Round 2, you're going to fix the offensive line. And we could potentially trade back and still fix the offensive line as well, which is beautiful. But the biggest thing is we are not giving the Cardinals the opportunity at getting somebody who, if used properly, could be an absolute game-changing superstar. At number 16 for the Arizona Cardinals, again, Monty is someone who likes to trade back. He likes to, manipulate the board, see how everything's going. And I'm looking at a team right here who's definitely going to be sniping one of these offensive linemen. The Bengals, they're going to be sniping. So is there a team that could be looking at it? Not within striking range, right? So what else is that threat? Edge rusher, technically, edge rusher is also a threat for the Arizona Cardinals for them to take. So you could go Mike Green here, throw the curveball. I think the smartest thing to do would be to go Tyreek Williams, which is probably what I'm going to do. FYI. Like, I do think this defensive interior class is more overrated than what people want to, like, people say this is like the best defensive interior class in like the past decade. I'm like, let's pipe it down. I like these guys, but I mean, like, let's just keep it real here. I think Tyleik Williams is fantastic. I think he can absolutely be an asset on this team. I just don't see anybody that is like genuinely dying to move up. I mean, technically speaking, we could see the Buccaneers try to move up at this point to try to select someone like Mike Green above the Falcons, but I mean, if I'm I don't really worry too much, right? You can get Jihad Campbell, worst case scenario. Like, Jihad Campbell is a primary target for both of these teams for me. But Mike Green and Jihad Campbell, are they going to be going in the next 3? If they are, then it's like, well, you can get Nick Scorton, right? Like, I feel very happy sitting with these teams. And unless I really want to get petty, which I've done before, but I just don't really think it's worth it. Now, you could look at a couple teams again to move up for Will Campbell, but at this point, I just don't think the buyer is there. And so we're going to be going after the best talent available. I don't know who's going to be available at 47, but I don't think there's going to be a 330-pound player who's an elite block shedder who has still ridiculous untapped potential there, like Tyleik Williams. He threw, even though, granted, it was not because of purely his strength, but it was due to leverage and tripping, threw Kelvin Banks on his face. And he's under 22 years old. I think he's a smart decision. I really do. And making the smart decision is a lot more valuable than getting a couple picks and trying to be cute with it and drafting a player like Mike Green that I think needs a lot more development. At 17 for the Cincinnati Bengals, we could trade back, potentially. But I'm locked in on Will Campbell at this point. Like, I know that we could end up trying to go edge rusher, and like, the defense needs help, right? It definitely does. But I just think Will Campbell's too good to pass on based on the realism of all this. I try to be as realistic as possible, but he can play guard and fill in for Orlando when he ends up leaving in a couple years as he trains up to be a tackle. But I do have my concerns with Will Campbell. He is somebody where I have him sitting at 28 on my board. I mean, call it crazy, but it is what it is. I just think Will Campbell is that kind of guy that you just genuinely want as a high floor player. Now, I will say Tyler Booker fits the description if you want to wait. Do I change my opinion? I was saying, like, I'm not going to be moved, but I kind of want to be moved. I kind of want to change some things up. And I think that makes better content for you guys too. So fuck it. We're going to change it. I've been like pretty heavy on my stance in going interior offensive line, and I think this interior offensive line class is so good. Like, you don't need to. So let's look at the options here. I think edge certainly should be considered. You guys are probably so happy right now. You guys are like cheering in the background. I could hear it deep down inside my head. My schizophrenia. All my friends in there are getting all hyped up for you. But I think that going after edge rusher is the smartest thing to do. Like, at this point, get somebody who will be able to like have that high level production. And I think Nick Scorton's going to go higher than a lot of other players with his build. So he's going to be the pick. But he's somebody that at 285, first off, he played at Purdue. So you already know he can play in the cold. It's just not very nice climate there at Purdue. But he's someone that you can guarantee can play up in the AFC North. He's physical, but also he's like the most athletic 285 guy in terms of the fluidity of his movement. Like, this dude does a spin move better than 240 pounders. It is honestly somebody that should have been a top 5 pick and ended up having a really solid year, just not the same level that you're kind of hoping for. He's number 23 on my board. Number 18 for the Atlanta Falcons. I don't trust Mike Green to be developed properly here necessarily, but I also think that I don't want him to go to my own division rival. So I'm going to say, let's put some trust into our coaching and take the player with the most potential to also, out of spite, not give Tampa the opportunity at getting somebody who could be truly special. And so we're going to go Mike Green there at 18. We got some extra draft capital, and then we ended up basically choosing the evil that we will face with Tampa Bay, which with Tampa Bay, I'm running this to the podium. It's Jihad Campbell. I know corner's an easy pick for them as well, but Jihad Campbell's an edge 1 coming out of his high school class. He's super young. He's super athletic. To me, I think he belongs as an edge over a linebacker, but the beautiful thing is he can play both. And for you guys, that flexibility really can mean something. Again, if you really, Falcons fans, if you really wanted to, feel free to flip them. Like, they're going to play relatively similar roles on your team. So I'm not going to be butthurt at either team getting either player. At 20 for the Denver Broncos, you got Luther Burden here. I personally absolutely adore Amari Hampton. I think Amari Hampton's going to be a great move, but I also do want to see some other outcomes. You could go after Colson Loveland here, absolutely. But I do think that the Broncos could also get someone like Cam Scatabo down the board. Like, you have some really, really good options. So I'm going to go after Luther Burden here. I saw with Mims getting all these like bubble screens and all that stuff. I'm like, dude, he's not built for that. Luther Burden is. So I have a clear vision for what Luther Burden could be in this offense. And so I'm going to exercise that choice. At 21 for the Pittsburgh Steelers, I want to move down here. You got Will Campbell, Kelvin Banks slipping, which, to be fair, Kelvin Banks, I don't know why people love him to the degree that they do, because his feet are slow. He has poor leverage. I'm just going to be so honest. I am not a Kelvin Banks guy. I think he's a good player, but people are talking about him as the best offensive lineman in the class. I'm like, let's pump the brakes there. So sitting here with the Steelers, you can talk about Emeka Egbuka. I mean, I think that's perfectly reasonable. But at the same time, I'm looking at Will Campbell here and a lot of teams that might want to move up over the Los Angeles Chargers, where I think Will Campbell is an incredible selection for. So who needs a guard? Technically, we could talk about the Vikings. They don't have enough picks. We could also talk about the Texans. They have enough needs to where they're going to get a great value regardless. Like, it is tough to justify moving up for one of these offensive linemen when the class is super loaded. So we might not have a buyer. We might not. But there might be a buyer for Emeka Egbuka. And I'm looking at the Commanders here. They're 2 pick strapped. I'm looking at the Bills. In the Bills, my goal for the Bills would be get a 3rd round pick back. Like, I want to be able to reshuffle my board. Now, you can look at the Eagles as well, because the Eagles could be excited about a multitude of players here, including Colson Loveland, but Howie's not going to do that. The more I've sat and thought about Howie, and by the way, Ben Morrison's returning this, otherwise would be my dream pick. He would have been gone a long time ago. He's not declared yet, so I have him returning because I don't want to give myself the hope and end up being crushed. I'd rather be excited. He's the only player I'm doing that for right now. So we'll see. But at 31 though, for Pittsburgh, I think the Bills are a great trading partner. I think getting more firepower for them is just like something that I personally think would be a very nice addition. He's not going to be there. You're not going to have that luxury, right? At 30. You're not going to have that luxury. It's not going to cost a full second to move up. I genuinely think you might be able to send 56 or 62. I personally think the Steelers should be happy with this. 30 and 62 for 21.85. That way, the Steelers, we keep the same quantity of picks, but the Bills reshuffle their board. They jump multiple AFC teams that I think should be going after Emeka Egbuka, including some playoff contenders that could use Emeka Egbuka. And, I mean, technically the Chargers as well, if you think Ladd could be a boundary, which I do. I do think that there's a realistic shot that the Bills, with all this draft capital, could say, hey, we're just going to reshift our board. I don't think there's 2 second-round picks that are going to have the value that moving up and selecting a legitimate every down weapon who can play inside or out will have on our squad. And so I think Emeka Egbuka is the right choice. You look at the wide receivers after this. You can go Matt Golden here, to be fair, as well. Which, low-key, Matt Golden might be taken before, because you got the Chargers. I think Matt Golden would be a good one for the Chargers. But I want someone who can play in the ice cold. And Emeka Egbuka can play on the boundary. You look at his slot reps versus wide snaps, it is far heavier on the slot roll. But this guy is just built to be open. He's built to be consistent. And you can play him on the boundary. I like the fact that he always has roughly 25% of his reps on the boundary. So we're going to be going after Emeka Egbuka there. At 22 for the Los Angeles Chargers, offensive line super key to address. I think we really could see a slip of the interior offensive line class. Matt Golden's the guy who's intriguing me at the moment, although I don't think it's realistic to go Matt Golden over Will Campbell. You got to have some help on the interior of the offensive line. We're going to go after Will Campbell here. At number 23 for the Green Bay Packers, corner's probably the likely move for this team. But you got guys like Amari Hampton on the board that I think teams should try to move up for. And you're not going to trade out of the first round. So the question is, who would move up for him? you're not going to do it. The draft's in Green Bay. You're not going to trade out with a team like the Patriots. Although you could try to move back in to be able to select a corner with a 5th-year contract. I think that would be interesting. That would be really interesting. But also, I think that the Vikings are in a position where they'd be willing to move back. So I don't think we're going to scrap that idea. We're going to scrap it because I was like, but you don't play tug of war with your fans there. That's not cool. So they're going to be staying in. I do think that we could see Kelvin Banks being moved up for, whether that's by the Rams, whether that's by the Ravens. Actually, I really like that idea for the Ravens. You can put him to guard, and if you have that vision, you really could put him to tackle as well. You're going to be jumping the Texans here. And for people saying it's unrealistic, good players fall in every single draft. I want to remind you that. Like, it is something that happens every time. We're like, how did he fall? And it's a very realistic potential that if Kelvin Banks tests out very poorly athletically, teams will have concerns about him as a tackle. And then now you're in the mix with all the other guards. So, but he does have that potential to be a legit tackle. And so for that, for this move up, I think it might be 135. You might even get something back, like 199 in return for this. But like, I personally think we'll go 135. And I think I'd be happy with the Packers too. Like, I'd just be perfectly reasonable. Like, it would be reasonable. So the Ravens move up, select Kelvin Banks to play that guard role for them, tackle the long, because I do think Ronnie Stanley comes back. So continuing on, we have the Minnesota Vikings. And again, so many good players here. So many. And the question is there going to be a team looking at a running back? Probably at pick 30, we could see the Steelers looking at Amari and Hampton at that point. So I don't know if we're going to see necessarily a massive move up like that. Now, you could also see a team like, you could see a team trying to move up for a left tackle here. Like Armand Membu is fantastic, but I also have my concerns there. I mean, there's genuine concerns. I know he's a right tackle, but tackle in general. Is there a team that might want to move up for a weapon? I mean, we're seeing a team right here in the Texans that my primary issue to address is going to be that receiving threat, because the receiving core is pretty barren. And the teams that would be looking at receiver, I mean, technically speaking, we could try to get ballsy with one of these teams. It's just, I don't think that the return on investment is there. It's not fair. So we're not going to be moving up for that. Again, running back, I think I'm trying to target right now with the Patriots. Like, that's my dark horse team to move up and select Amari and Hampton. But I was kind of hoping to see if maybe another team like the Rams would make it a little bit cheaper. Other players that need to go in this range, you got Colston Loveland, to be fair. And this might be where I'd feel comfortable trading with a team to move up for Loveland. And that team could be the Philadelphia Eagles. At this point, for this short range of a trade, that would make a lot of sense. But I also can see the Chiefs trying to move up and select Loveland. You know what? I haven't gotten ballsy in a minute. The Chiefs traded up in the last first round. We're going to do it. I don't think that, I mean, you do have multiple third round picks, and I think that's what it would cost like pick number 66. But you'd also probably want something in return if you were going to do that. So we actually might give 96 and then a future 4th round pick to move up. I just don't think you'd have to ask for something in return if you gave up 66. So I think 96 and a future 4 will be able to get it done. And for the Chiefs, this gives you your successor to Kelsey. I mean, I wasn't even thinking about it. Colston Loveland's great for y'all. So we're going to go Colston Loveland there, take him away from the Rams and whoever else might try to move up. And Minnesota gets 3 picks, which is great. 25 for the Texans. I think going after offensive line at this point or wide receiver is key. I do like the offensive guard class as it goes down the board. I'm going to be going after Matt Golden. The receiving core is crippled. You need to continue giving Stroud more firepower. Matt Golden is perfect for that. 26 for the Los Angeles Rams. Another spot where I could totally see a trade back here. And I was just talking about it, and I feel very comfortable doing this as well. I'm moving up with the New England Patriots. I think that this is the smart thing to do. I think the Rams try to get aggressive, or else they're going to be conservative. And I'm not going to be aggressive in this situation. I think with the Rams pick situation, I personally feel very happy. It would take probably pick 77 to move up to this range because, as I was saying, it was not a similar but an understandable range there. For this, being able to give up pick 77, and you could get something in return if you really wanted to. But I think if I'm the Rams and I'm moving back, was that 12 spots? I'm actually taking pick 69 because it's too nice. But for New England, this is such a big issue that we need to solve. Like, solve the offensive line in free agency. I know that's a lot easier said than done, but we're going to go Amari and Hampton here because I think that totally retooling your offense, right? You look at Amari and Hampton, Tetra and McMillan. As long as your offensive line keeps developing as well, you have key pieces, Layden Robinson, Caden Wallace. I think that's going to be a really good return on investment there. 27 for the Green Bay Packers. I think they're going to go after defensive back or edge. You could talk about that too. Interior offensive line with Booker would be intriguing, but like you could look at some of these freak individuals that would make a lot of sense on this team. You could boost the pass rush. With Kenneth Grant, it would be where you could actually replace Daryl Slayton. That'd be pretty fun, actually. Last time we went to Michigan in the first round, it took a little bit, but Rashawn Gary ended up really working out. I'm going to go after Kenneth Grant. He has the athleticism to play 3-tech as well. Just being able to get that pass rushing upside and boosting the defensive interior is going to be super key. And also, technically would have been a potential move there for the Lions, who have a couple years left with, was it DJ Reader? So I think it would be a good move as well to mitigate that risk. For the Detroit Lions at 28, I think the right thing to do here is to address that edge position. And I'm going to go actually after a player who I like more than Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau. And I'm seeing a lot of respected names say that as well. I didn't know JT had 15 sacks this year. JT is fantastic, man. I mean, he really knows how to just completely take over a game. Same thing with Jack Sawyer. I think Jack's awesome. Shamar's the higher ceiling player. But JT is just someone who I think deserves more love and more consideration as a legit first-round player. 29 for the Washington Commanders. Corner, tackle, kind of the huge. You could go after Armand Membu at this point because I really do think he is considerable in this range. I personally like him to Seattle. So this is a very realistic spot. Ben Morrison considered returning in this one for those of y'all who missed that a little bit earlier. But Siobhan Ravel could be a really intriguing one to replace Benjamin St-Juste. Wide receiver-wise, none. Don't take one in the first. I love Jaden Higgins, just don't take him in the first. Edge-wise, though, I mean, you have tools here, but similar to what, I'm forgetting who somebody was talking about, the fact that, actually my boy Tobias, like actually the only sub I've ever met in real life, Tobias ended up mentioning this, similar to how the Texans can kind of get away with defensive interiors, kind of putting a guy in there. Washington Commanders have kind of done that with the edge position, and I think you guys do a great job at that. So you don't need to spend a first on an edge, in my opinion. I actually do think it's very realistic to go after Armand Membu here. Worst case scenario, he has to kick into guard, but I don't think he has to. I think he's a pretty damn quality offensive tackle, but this is a curveball, but he is my number one right tackle. Spoiler alert. Ozzy Trapilo. A really consistent right tackle. Great anchor. Not going to surprise anybody or flash, but just really damn good. I'm going to go Ozzy here. I think that's my curveball. It's a curveball that is actually just the top guy on my board for a position they need. But surprise guys go in the first round. Ozzy Trapilo has been just locked down. He's 6'8", 310. Like, just really, really good anchor there. Boston College knows what they're doing. I fuck with it. Steelers, 30. I mean, again, this is a position where we could try to double trade out, but we kind of need those fifth-year contracts at this point. Looking at what we could go after, you could look at the quarterback route, go for a fifth-year contract. I don't think that's a smart thing to do. Wide receiver, don't think that's a smart thing to do. But I really do like the idea of us going after a cornerback here, and I've loved that idea for a while now. I'm a big Trey Amos guy. I know that there's some people who just don't like him. Please, for the love of God, before you try to criticize Trey Amos, if you haven't watched him and you're just scared because you don't know the name, and it's okay, because why the hell should you? Like, that's why you're watching this video. Understand, he's my number 38 player in the class, and that's with multiple players above him who I have starred for dropping. Again, this is just straight up sent, like, highest to lowest in terms of grade. There are players in here that are still being updated who will be dropping. So he's my number, was at 36 player on my board. At 30, I think that's respectable. I think it's good. But I will say, let's also throw a realistic curveball in here as well. defensive interior is a legit concern. Hate to say it, but Cam Hayward's not getting any younger, and he's the heart of our defense. I could really see the Steelers liking Walter Nolan. I'm not the biggest Walter Nolan guy, but he's also someone who I'm reevaluating again just to try to love him more. We're going to go Walter Nolan here because I think also it's realistic at 30 to take him. Would have been my dream pick there for the Philadelphia Eagles, FYI. But Walter Nolan, I mean, we need somebody to replace Cam Hayward in the long run, and we have good pieces, but defense interior isn't being talked about enough. If we're able to retool our draft to where we can still get a quality corner, a quality receiver in the second round with those 2 second-round picks, we really could pivot and be able to have a very successful draft. And, we can end up being really on top. Number 31 for the Philadelphia Eagles. We're in a good spot here, honestly, with Philly. You can go a multitude of routes. I personally think Howie could try to trade out of the first round and just continue getting a ton of picks. Like, the guy who I'm looking at here, though, is Armand Membu. You can use him as a guard in the short run, but that is the vision for him to be the tackle in the long. I'm worried about a lot of these players that are kind of these quasi-guard tackle hybrids. If you want to go the conservative route, you go with Johnny Cornelius, but I think he's a really, really, really good guard that isn't really going to be a tackle, right? Marcus Bowe, he came on the show, said his arm length was more than 30 inches. The number I was hoping for is more than 32, and I did see that pop up this year. Jonah, a lot of room to grow. A lot of room to grow. You go to Stout U, you grow. But if you're going to have a lot of room to grow, I would go Urzuri or Membu at this point. And yes, you could try to take that at 63. But I also am looking at the edge group, and I could be happy with what they get at 63. But I'm hearing y'all in the back of my head say, don't get cute. You've already kind of done that with the past 2 picks. Do something that I think we'd actually do. And I respect that. I think Jack Sawyer is someone who can drop into coverage and be able to play that relatively well. Dominic Ziruwaku actually probably makes more sense than even that. He had, 731, so 35 reps in coverage this past year. He's a strong edge defender. He sets the edge well. Princely Uman as well. I don't know why it's taking forever for it to load, but shout out PFF for that. But regardless, someone who had a fantastic year, 11 sacks on the year. But, I mean, there is some legit push for that. You guys know what I think of Braden Swinson as well. When you end up looking at this, what is that? Was that like 590? Was it 595? 595 reps. So, I guess technically 42 coverage reps there as well. That will be my curveball because he's someone who can do stand-up linebacker as well. That's what I love. And he can also rush from the interior, which is just nuts. So, yeah, you know what? Because I don't see the defensive interior value at this point. Just don't. You can go Derek Harmon if you wanted to, but I'd prefer to roll the dice and go after someone who I truly believe in, who will be most likely a late first-round pick. I have him as my number 3 player in the class, but again, I realize that, all the people who I talk to who really evaluate him and grade him and that I've actually been able to sit down and discuss it with, all of them have him top 50. So why is it unrealistic that he goes at 31? He has the 3rd out of the respectable edge rushers, which is he's the 3rd true pass rush win rate, 33.9%. 1 out of over 3 he wins. That is just below Abdul Carter and a little bit below Josiah Stewart, which again, I didn't really see that with Josiah, but I digress. Minnesota Vikings sitting here at 32. I think this is beautiful. We're going to get a corner or Armand Membu. And I like the corner class to the point where I'd feel comfortable taking one there at 96 to where I'm like, I could go Armand here. But do we want to trade out and get a corner then in early round 2? Or do we just fix this issue and roll the dice with a guard in free agency or something like that? This is an area where you don't want to mess around, right? And to be fair, I think Jahdae Barron would be a really good pick. I think he's perfect to replace Byron Murphy. And I think you might get 1 or 2 of the guys back, but Murphy maybe not. And that means I will feel comfortable selecting Jahdae Barron there at 32. That's going to be the video. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Love you. See you on the far side. Peace.